Hey, everybody. My name is Josh. I'm one of the pastors here at ABF. Hey, just a few quick things. Hopefully, you're going to be inspired, convicted maybe even by today's message. The Lord does that. The Holy Spirit works and moves when we get into His Word. But our hope is that you are connected to a local church. That is the best thing for us as we're trying to follow Jesus. But hey, a few things before we get to today's teaching. Number one, if we can pray for you, please text us. We'd love to pray for you this week. Things are going on. Let us lift you up in prayer. 97,000 is the number that you can text, 97 and 3 zeros. If you're interested in things going on here at ABF, please check the website. All the events, calendar, all that stuff is there. Finally, if you have been blessed by the ministries of ABF, whether that's in person or online, would you prayerfully consider donating to the ministries here to help us keep going? Without further ado, that's all I've got for you. Let's get to today's teaching.
Hey, it's always great to be with you, ABF. I'm so glad to be back in my annual pilgrimage to the pulpit here. And, I'm wearing some Dodger stuff here today, and maybe you'll be able to see this beautiful pair of shoes come up that are custom-made Air Jordans. I got nothing on me. But hey, with all that said, let's just jump right into our text today. We're in Matthew chapter 8. Last week, Pastor Josh covered the first half of the chapter, and so I'm entitling the second half of the chapter, The Perfect Storm and When Pigs Fly. We'll be looking at Matthew 8, 23 to 34. Now, it would be super easy for us to say this is just a chapter on all of Jesus' miracles. But I think actually that's not what the text is emphasizing. I think what is best understood as this context is Jesus exercising His authority and His power in all areas of life, in all arenas, multiple arenas. And so as the song goes, He is the way maker, He is the miracle worker, but ultimately He is the King of our lives. And so He's going to demonstrate His power and authority in two more arenas. Now, with that being said, in your notes, you can see that I've summarized some of the areas that we talked about last week. So the first power that He exercises is in the physical realm. And in your notes, it says that Jesus heals people. And Josh did a great job of covering all this. But let me just summarize. He has power over the unclean. He cleansed the leper in verses 1 to 4. Who had a long-standing medical issue. He has power and authority over the unforgiven and people with paralyzing disabilities. And we saw the faith of the centurion in verses 5 to 13. Then His power over the unhealthy. He heals common fevers, specifically Peter's mother-in-law, and then generally many others. And then the last section there, He really has authority and power over the uncommitted, to people who have to figure out if they want to count the cost. Now, that was the first half of the chapter. Let's get to what we're covering today in point number 2, because we're going to see His authority over two more arenas. The second arena, moving from the physical, is the natural realm, or nature. And we're going to see that He calms this storm. And let's just call that His power over the uncontrollable. So He has power over the unclean, the unforgiven, the unhealthy, the uncommitted, and now the uncontrollable. And this is a little scary for me. We're talking about storms and boats. I've been on several cruises, but my worst nightmare would be in a boat, in a hurricane, which is essentially, we're going to find out, is what happened on the Sea of Galilee. And that ranks right up on the top of my scary list. And so here's what it must feel like, because if you've ever been in that situation, you're trapped. You're on a boat. You can't go anywhere. There's no escaping. There's no place to run or hide. You're just hoping that you don't sink. Now, hopefully you've never been in a situation like that, but what would you do if it did happen to you? Because that's exactly what Jesus' disciples are experiencing when they're on this rowboat. It's not a cruise ship. And they are in the same boat, pun intended. And so where do you turn and how do you respond to the storms that happen in your life, whether it's physically or metaphorically? So let's look at our text together And you see the first point is the crisis in verses 23 to 24. Now, I've got this nice little outline that most of it's filled in for you. So hopefully you've secured that while you're watching this. Now, here's the crisis. And before I get to verse 23 and 24, I want to go back to verse 18 to set the stage. Now, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And now we go to verse 23. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and behold, there was a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. This is not an insignificant fact, being swamped by the waves. But it says very calmly, he was asleep. He is literally asleep. Now, whose idea was to take this boat across to the other side? It's Jesus' idea. This whole little trip is his deal. This thing started by the disciples obeying his instructions. Now, Jewish culture at the time believed that when storms happened in life, and it happened to you specifically, it was because you had done something wrong, something bad, and God was going to punish you. And so we saw that even with Jonah fleeing from God in the book of Jonah. That storm comes. And so that's why this is important to be reminded that these disciples are just following Jesus in obedience. They hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't their sin that brought this storm up. And we're going to see a very interesting interaction between Jesus and the storm in just a few minutes. But the bottom line is they were faithful. They were walking in obedience exactly the way Jesus had commanded them to. And sometimes when you walk in obedience to Jesus, you're going to hit rough storms in your life. We probably all followed it. Just because you are a Christian doesn't mean that you're exempt from trials and tribulations and storms in your life. James 1 says, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials, aka storms in your life. And so you could have done nothing wrong. And quite to the contrary, it's because you are committed to Christ that sometimes problems come your way. So the question today is, how will the storms of life that you experience, how's it going to affect you? How will you respond? Let's see if we get some clues from the text. Now it says they're taking the boat across the lake to escape the crowds. And I've been on that lake. I've been to Israel. It's a big lake. In fact, out in the middle of it, you think you're in the middle of an ocean because the Sea of Galilee, a.k.a. Gennesaret, is, depending on who you read, it was 6 to 8 miles wide, 10 to 13 miles long, 600 to 700 feet below sea level, and they're in a boat, not a small fishing boat. It's not what you think. It's nothing big. And so that's how the story starts. And that, by the way, that would have taken them nearly all night to get across the lake. Now it says there's a great storm. That Greek word is seismos. It's the same word we get the word seismograph, which is how we measure earthquakes today. And so the Sea of Galilee is known for these kind of violent, unpredictable storms that come up without warning. And they develop because the cold air meets the warm air and in this natural basin, and I won't get into the meteorology of it, but it creates violent windstorms on that lake. Now, we know a little bit about that right here in Agoura Hills when we get the Santa Ana winds coming. Man, they blow through. We had that just happen this year in January, and fires everywhere all around us, etc. But if you've ever been on a lake like these people were, this happened just a week ago on Lake Tahoe, and check out this video.
The Coast Guard reported 6 to 8 foot swells, 30 knot winds, and even snow when a freak storm rolled over Lake Tahoe. A time lapse over 2 hours shows just how quickly the storm became violent. The Coast Guard says a 27-foot Chris Craft boat capsized, leaving 6 dead, 2 hospitalized, and 2 missing. The Coast Guard suspended its search for the 2 missing passengers.
All right. It's such a tragic thing that happened there, but I think that's what's going through the disciples' mind. This storm comes out of nowhere, and they're thinking, we could be dead. Now, it literally says in the text, the boat was being swamped. The waves are so high, they're crashing over, filling up the boat, and they think it's going to sink. In fact, it has the same properties of maybe a hurricane that's brewing there on the lake. But what is Jesus doing all this? He is asleep. It says in Mark, and by the way, this account is in two other Gospels, both in Mark and Luke. And in Mark 8:35, it says he's asleep on this cushion, it says. And that cushion was actually for the helmsman. He's literally given the best and most honored seat in the boat, and he's exhausted. Now, it's the only time in the Gospels that we see Jesus, it's recording that he was sleeping. So when we talk about Jesus being both God and man, in his humanness, he's exhausted from teaching, from miracles, from crowds. And, you know, we don't know whether Jesus was an extrovert or introvert. I won't get into that. But the bottom line is he's human and he's also God. But because he's weary and empty and tired, he's able to sleep through this complete storm like a hurricane. And so we see his full humanity in that he's sleeping on the boat. And he was just taking solitude for his soul. Now, you would ask the question like, how could you ever sleep through all of this? Jesus is tired, but he also knows he's God, that it's not his time. And so I'll bring this up again. It wasn't his time to die. His death on the cross is imminent, but it's not through dying on this lake. So there's a cry from the disciples, verse 25, and they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." Can you imagine this? Except for the fishermen of the boat, of the disciples, some of them were the fishermen. The Jewish people aren't naturally known as seafaring people. They're not beach people. They are land people. They are historically afraid of water. They don't have any floaties on their arms. And fishermen in general, by the way, they're just completely superstitious to begin with. So it's a reasonable request if you believe that Jesus is somehow asleep at the wheel. Now, at this point, the disciples have seen Jesus perform all these other miracles. We just spent half a chapter looking at all the ways he heals people physically. And yet when they face their crisis, they're not certain he's going to be able to help them. Now, before we judge them too quickly, don't we do the same thing? We see how Jesus helps other people, but here's what they're thinking. They're saying, well, what right do we have to think that he would save us? He has no idea what's going on right now. No, not true. He does. He's not paying any attention to us. That's true, but it hasn't forgotten them. He's sound asleep, so they may not fully appreciate that in his humanity he's sleeping, but he is God and that he's got this. And now they need a miracle for themselves. Have you ever felt that way? You seem to see God at work in everybody else's life, and you seem to be able to trust God for that and pray for those ends. But when you're facing your storm, your disaster, if we're really honest, some of us feel that Jesus is asleep at the wheel, so to speak. And in fact, this is an important point for us to ponder. How do you respond when you are in the middle of that storm? Can you trust him, or you think that miracle is for somebody else? Now, they're saying, save us, do something. And you could think that they are trying to bargain with God. Like, hey, if you save us, we'll be missionaries in Africa for the rest of our lives. No, there's no bargaining going on. They are begging for their lives. So this is not about bargaining. It's about begging. And they're literally asking God to save their lives. Sidebar, Jesus never, ever resents us coming to him. They did the right thing. In fact, that's the one thing the disciples did right in this whole deal. They went and asked him for help. They are in trouble. They don't call the Coast Guard. There's no rescue boats, although we do know that there's other boats, I'll refer to this later, that were on that lake at the same time. They're in the middle of the storm, and what do? They went to Jesus. So who do you go to when the storms of life are beating you up? It's very easiest to talk to everybody else, talk to a friend, but at its basic level, when you're facing a storm not of your doing, a trial, a tribulation, a sickness, wayward kids, you name whatever that storm is, we got to go to Jesus. That's where it starts. So here's a command. Look at verse 26. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then he rose and look at what he does. He rebukes the winds and the sea, and then there's a great calm. This is such an interesting order in the text here. So they wake Jesus up, but before he rebuked the wind and the rain and got, peace be still kind of thing, he rebukes his disciples and said, "Your faith is so small." Now, we put it in human terms. If our kids were having a nightmare in the middle of the night, as a loving dad or a mom, we'd hug them and say, "It's all right, honey, it'll be fine. Let me put you back to sleep." He does not give them that loving, comforting arm. In fact, I think what's going on, he spent 2.5 years with them, with these guys, and he may be internally frustrated a bit, like they don't fully realize who he is. In fact, he uses the word little faith. In other words, they can't see beyond the obvious. If they believe that he was the Messiah, they know he has to go to the cross, but I don't think they fully have that all dialed in for sure. They should have known he can't die, but they don't know that. He knows that. And so he's thinking, do they think I'm going to allow Satan to derail my redemptive plan for all of humanity and preempting my death here on this lake before I can get to the cross? You say, where'd you get that? Hang on. I want to talk about that in just a moment. So yeah, he may be a little frustrated with them, but this is an issue of faith, not fear. The issue is this. He isn't upset for him being woken up. He's upset that they don't trust him, that he's got this. I got this. You ever been around one of your kids and they're all worried about this, that, or other thing, and you just look at me, I got this. I got this. That's usually my wife and I when I'm driving somewhere and she doesn't think I'm in my appropriate lane. And I say this lovingly, but she is my little helper. And now that's on the record for all of you to always hear and be reminded of maybe your little helper when you have to say, I got this. And that's how Jesus is saying, I got this. Now, I alluded to it. Do you think this is a possible demonic, aka satanic attack? Because it makes no sense to me. Why would he rebuke a storm? A storm is just doing what it does. It's nature. It happens, right? And I think possibly, and I'm going to tie this to the when pigs fly section at the end of this sermon, that Satan's trying to eliminate him. You say, well, where do you get that from? Well, let's just look at a short history of how many times Satan tried to eliminate the messianic line that he would come from. Number one, he tried to derail the messianic line when Cain killed Abel. Through Herod and the slaughter of babies in Bethlehem. And then when he's tempted to jump off the Temple Mount when he tempted him in the desert. When the people of Nazareth tried to throw him off a cliff. And now maybe he's using I can't prove this. It's one of those questions I'll ask when I get to heaven. But is he going to use this storm to capsize the boat and drown everyone on it? Now, we know that his next assignment, we'll look at in a moment, is he's going to do an exorcism and command a bunch of demons to go take residence in some pigs. And we'll look at that in a moment. And maybe the demonic realm wants to preempt that from even happening. Here's something that's super interesting. The same Greek word that's used for rebuking the storm is the same word he uses to confront the demoniac in another passage in Luke 4. So he's literally saying to the storm, as we see from Mark and Luke, be still and be muzzled. Now, when we think about fear, here's you've seen this on posters. What is fear? False evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. And that's what happens oftentimes when we're fearful. We look at things and we misinterpret the circumstances and we assume the worst instead of believing the best, etc. Now, Back in the COVID day in March and April of 2020, I did an exhaustive study on fear in the Bible because I had heard this deal. There are 365 times God says in his word, fear not, do not fear, fret not, etc. Now, I studied, I tried, I found every other derivative. I only came up with 201 times he says, fear not. Now, I know it's not 365. It's a lot. But the bottom line is 46 different books of the Bible say, fear not. But 20 of them don't even mention fear or fear not, including, ironically, Jonah. And so they are definitely fearful. And what is the result? It says there was a great calm. Ultimately, when there are storms in your life, ultimately, when you work through them with Jesus, he'll provide that same calm in your life. Now, here's something that's interesting. The contrast between fear and faith, they are fundamentally opposed to each other. And those of you who are here live with me see in your notes that I put a chart together on fear versus faith. And you can just look at those. There's quite a difference between fear and faith. Fear looks inward and downward. What's going to happen? Is it going to turn out all right? Faith looks upward and forward. Hey, I know that there's a plan for me. What's next, God? Fear flourishes on the unknowns, where faith focuses on God's sovereignty. Fear feels like life is just out of control. I can't control this. And some of you have felt that. I get it. I've been that place where I'm fearful, like, I can't control this. I can't solve this. There's no quick or easy fix. Whereas faith focuses on the fact that God is always in control when you even feel like you're out of control. Then fear, here's what it does to me. It drains me. It paralyzes me. Where faith strengthens and empowers you to go through those situations. But here's the bottom line. What if God doesn't come through? That's a fear-oriented approach. Where faith says, I trust God already that he has a way through. So different. By the way, I want to thank Dr. David Fassold from Journey South Bay who gave me this chart. He's got great insights into faith versus fear. Now, the confirmation, verse 27. And the men marveled, the disciples marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? Remember that old movie back, 70s, 80s called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? That one phrase, who are those guys? Well, that's kind of like, who is this guy? I mean, look at what he has the power over. And even though they've been in with him almost 3 years, they haven't put the puzzle pieces together. It's not so much questioning who he is, but they don't quite understand what his mission and purpose is. So they're barely grasping the idea that God is and can do whatever he chooses and wants to do. But this is his first nature miracle. He's healed a lot of people. He's turned water to wine, but I mean, he can control the atmospheric conditions on the Sea of Galilee. That's pretty awesome. So, as we know, the Israelites viewed the sea as an enemy and that they couldn't control. But now they see Jesus, the future Messiah, is somebody who can control nature, the natural realm, just like God protected Noah in the ark in a similar fashion. So, I think the problem is they haven't connected miracles to Messiah. Miracles to Messiah. The brain hasn't connected those dots together for them. And so, as God and man, that duality is going on right now. As a man, he was sleeping, he was tired. But as God, he had everything under control. So, in the storms of life, I think there are 3 conclusions or 3 lessons in part A. This is like going to the movies, and now we're about to go to intermission, then we'll go to the next act. So here are my 3 conclusions from the storms of life. The perfect storm. God is sovereign. He can do whatever he wants, with whoever he wants, whenever he wants. And sometimes I think we just kind of give lip service to the fact that he is the authority, the boss man, the Lord of our lives. And we don't live our lives as if we're dependent on that. Something to think about, but he is sovereign. Number 2, we see that his timing is not our timing. We're going to pray for God's will, but we then have to wait. We don't want to wait. We want it now. We want it fixed now. We want our prayers answered now. We want our kids to walk with Jesus now. We want our marriage to be healed now. We want our finances to turn around now. And yet, Jesus doesn't usually work on our timeline. In fact, he doesn't just a little cosmic, genie who dispenses favor to us. And in fact, most of the time we have to wait. Then my last point, I said there was other boats on the water. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 and 36, it says that other boats were following them over. Now, I don't know, maybe it's an old school version of the paparazzi. They had seen all these miracles, so people are piling in boats. Follow that guy. He's going across the lake. So there's a flotilla of other boats in the region following them over. And I have a question for you. When you're caught in the storms of life, there were some choices. I wonder if the disciples said, well, you got to get out of this boat, even though Jesus is on it, and get in one of these other boats. Maybe that's what they're thinking. Or would you prefer that, hey, I'm just going to stay in the boat where Jesus is? Or do I jump ship to one of the other boats? Would you want to be in the other boats? Or would you want to have Jesus in your boat? That's a super important consideration. So here's the principle. I put it out for you here. Having Jesus in your boat matters. That's really important. But knowing the Jesus in your boat matters even more. Because storms are coming, friends. And so have him in your boat, yep, you're saved, you're a Christian. But knowing that he's in your boat and that you're going to grow and trust him through the storms of your life, that's what's important. But I want to ask you, fundamentally today, is he in your boat? All right. You say, what in the world does this now have with part 2 of this sermon? Because the third arena, he has power over the physical, he has power over the natural, and now we're going to look, he has power over the spiritual or the unseen realm. And so we're going to see that Jesus heals the demon-possessed men. And so now he has power over the unholy. So we had power over what? Let's just review all those in the past. So last week, Josh looked again at the unclean, had power over the unforgiven, the unhealthy, the uncommitted. We saw the storm, the uncontrollable, and now the unholy. So let's see the panic here. What's going on in verses 28 and 29. And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met with him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, what have you to do with us, O Son of God? You should underline that, by the way. Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now, he's on the other side. That's to Gadara, or the Gadarenes. It's the regional capital of the Decapolis. It's in the southeast part of the Sea of Galilee, and it's predominantly Gentiles. It's supported by the fact that this whole story here that we're going to look at has to do with pigs. Jews have nothing to do with pigs, and in fact, they thought they were unclean, they were filthy, they were horrible, just ah. And so that supports the idea that this was primarily a Gentile region. Now, I want to talk about, because people say, oh, there's so many contradictions in the Bible. There's the Bible. And if you look carefully at the 3 texts, Mark and Luke mention 2 demon-possessed men, where Matthew only references 1. Now, there's some answers to that. I won't get into all of it, but number 1, maybe one was doing the talking, the other one was just following along. But the bottom line, they're both possessed. And maybe Matthew references 2 people because, he's writing to a Jewish audience, and the testimony of 2 witnesses was valid in Jewish courts. So when they've been exorcised from these 2 men, they both validate what actually just happened. Now, they're clearly possessed. They're clearly demonized. Most of us in the Western world have not seen demon possession, like some of you who have been maybe as missionaries, or of examples in Haiti and Indonesia and all over the world. We see this kind of demonization, and they're disruptive to the point that the people in the region kind of steers clear of them. And in fact, they were violent. They don't mess with these guys because They are nasty. And so the demon was named Legion, according to Mark 5:9. The legion, and I think that represents multiple demons, are panicked, knowing that Jesus is God and clearly he had more power than they did. Now, they recognize his deity, which is consistent with James 2:19. Even the devils believe that there's a God, right? So this isn't a question of whether they know who he is. He clearly knows who he's dealing with. And so they're wondering, are you tormenting us before our time? In other words, they know their final judgment. They're going to be in the lake of fire with their boss, Satan. And so they temporarily want to escape that idea. Can we be thrown into something else? And you're going to see what their suggestion is or what happens here. And so we know in Revelation 20:10, their ultimate end is not, it doesn't end well for them, these demons. And so they're worried that he's going to pull the trigger on them way early. So here's the plea. Now, a herd of many pigs, a lot of pigs, they were feeding at some distance from them. So that's not like right next to them, across the way. And the demons begged Jesus, saying, if you cast us out, don't just send us to nothing land, or what they think is they're going right to the pit of hell, so to speak, but send us away into this herd of pigs. So the demons are literally talking through these two men. Now, I know at this point, some of you watching this and you're listening, those of you who are here live in a couple of days will be hearing this. The bottom line is this seems like the Twilight Zone, like do, 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 do. Like, does this stuff kind of happen? I want to address that in just a moment. And so, literally, they're begging for their very existence. Now, even after they're cast out, I do want to say something about that. They're going to take some time to recover. We don't know what happens. They're emotionally damaged. They're spiritually need healing, and we don't know what happens to them after this experience. But there's the push, and so there's this release. He's going to deliver the two men by ordering the demons into the herd of pigs. Look at verse 32. And he said to them, "Go." And so they came out, went into the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the waters. Now, there used to be a lot of tension with that because people who circled the Sea of Galilee could say, where in the world could there have been a cliff that those pigs could have gone off of? Isn't this another example of, yeah, that couldn't have happened? I've been there. I've been in that region. I know exactly where it is. And on our tour of Israel, we said, yeah, this is a cliff. It probably could have happened right here. And so there's this rejection in verses 33 and 34. The people don't like it for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is primarily financial. The herdsmen fled. I mean, they're freaked out. These pigs go crazy like lemmings over a cliff, and they go into the city, the herdsmen, and they tell everything, especially what had happened to the demon-possessed man. They're saying, and yeah, these demons came out, and it was crazy, and voices, and they're just freaked out. And behold, all the city, now we don't know how big that city was, they came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. Now, wouldn't you want him to stay? He released these demons. These poor men are no longer tormented. Or are they motivated financially, like, yeah, get out of here because we can't afford you to cast out any more demons to any more of our pigs. This is our livelihood. We don't know. So the bottom line is, I want to ask you this question. Can Christians be demon-possessed? I don't know that we've ever talked much about this. Maybe we have over the years. Let me read you from Ephesians 6:12 in the New Living Translation. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood and enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. So the mindset is, the short answer is this: no, you cannot be possessed as a Christ follower, as a genuinely true Christian saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. But I do believe Christians can be oppressed, not possessed, but oppressed. I had a teacher in seminary, Dr. Neil Anderson, who wrote The Bondage Breaker. Some of you have read Frank Peretti and This Present Darkness, and it talks about oppression about Christians. He had stories every week that make it was crazy, the kinds of things. He was involved in an exorcism ministry, Dr. Neil Anderson. I have only personally been involved in one exorcism in my life. I don't recommend it. I won't ever seek it out. I didn't want to do the first one. I was involved with our college pastor, and a girl came in who was clearly demonized. She was not a believer. And I'm telling you, everything that you've ever heard, it's true. I mean, her voice changed. Guttural sounds came out of what I think are demonic voices. It was really low like this. I mean, it was freaky. And I am prayed up, and we're prayed up, and it was not fun. It was a 6-hour ordeal that began one afternoon on a cold day in Minneapolis. So, I do not believe Christians can be possessed. I do think that we can be oppressed, and I don't have time to build that out, but I can tell you this much. The Holy Spirit cannot reside in you and coexist with evil incarnate. That's why I don't believe, for one of the reasons why you cannot be possessed. But the problem is there's mistakes we make, and in your notes here, I think there's a mistake we make. And this is in just understanding the whole unseen realm. We either make this mistake, and on the screen you'll see it here, obsession or obscurity. We either overemphasize demonic influence, like there's a devil behind every door, or the devil made me do it, or that's why I flunked my math test, blah, blah, blah. And so we got to be careful. Don't assume every problem is a result of demonic influence. We know some of your problems, you caused them. You caused your own suffering. The flip side, though, is obscurity. We underemphasize demonic influence. We don't believe that there's any impact at all. Like, whatever, yeah, that's not for me. That's a third world thing, whatever. So here's the flip side. Don't assume that any problem, just any problem, isn't a result of demonic influence. I'm not saying they all are. I'm saying very few probably are. In fact, most of you probably haven't dealt with this kind of influence. So let's wrap up the sermon, and I want to give you their plan. And I printed it out so you can kind of see it for yourself. Demons inflict suffering. Look at Matthew 17:15. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls in the fire or into the water. Jesus replied, verse 17, bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at the moment. Now, we say this doesn't happen today. It does happen today. I just try to find a balance between those two extremes of obsession versus obscurity. Secondly, demons tempt us. This is the oppression part of us, to sin and distract us from obeying God. And they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will. Captive to do his will. So our thinking is influenced kind of by secular culture. I think that's how he tempts us today. We've bought into the lies, which we're going to look at here as we wrap up. And so we're moved off our mission and are distracted for doing God's will by these methods. And then lastly, demons cause doubts about our faith. Look at 1 Timothy 4:1. The Spirit clearly says in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. So I put on your notes here, and again, for those of you who are watching online, Lord willing, you'll grab these notes and you can see it for yourself. Demons cause doubts. We see that, and we believe the lie. So Jesus quotes scriptures to refute the lies. He did it in his temptation, and he does it today. And in your notes, you see all these things listed. And I just invite you to think through these things quietly as I read them to you, and then identify the area that you are tempted to believe a lie in. Satan says it's impossible. God says all things are possible. Luke 18:27. I'm too tired. God says, I'll give you rest. Matthew 11:28-30. Nobody really loves me. He says, I love you. John 3:16 and John 13:34. I can't go on. He says, my grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 12:9. Psalm 3:5 and 6. I can't do it. You can do all things for me. Philippians 4:13. I'm not able. He says, I'm able. 2 Corinthians 9:8. It's not worth it. It'll be worth it. Romans 8:28. I can't forgive myself. I'll forgive you. 1 John 1:9, Romans 8:1. I can't manage. He says, I'll supply all your needs. Philippians 4:19. I'm afraid. I haven't given you a spirit of fear, 2 Timothy 1:7. I'm always worried and frustrated. Cast all your cares on me, 1 Peter 5:7. I feel all alone. He says, I'll never leave or forsake you, Hebrews 13:5. That's the list, friends. And if I'm really honest with you, I wrestle, as I said, with fear, worry, and frustration. And that's where I have to give that to the Lord. He's not giving me a spirit of fear. So how you deal with those triggers is the key. How you trust God and turn to Him. When you are tempted to believe a lie, remember God says He has a different plan. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes as I just help us wrap this up? Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this passage, because we do experience storms in our lives. And Lord, though most of us have never seen pigs fly, we do know that there's a spiritual realm, an unseen realm that often affects our lives, and it attacks our emotions and our thinking first. And so may we trust you to help us work through all of this. In Jesus' name, amen.